year 2012 was supposed to be the year of the great American road trip for the Caldwell family. Father, Mark, mother, Eleanor, and their 12-year-old daughter, Chloe. They were not adrenaline junkies, nor were they seasoned explorers. They were simply a family from coastal Maine, seeking an epic summer memory, a counterpoint to the endless gray of New England winters. Their itinerary was a patriotic loop across the West, a journey that promised sweeping vistas and national monuments, but the final, most indelible stop, the one that would forever etch their names into the registry of the missing, was the Grand Canyon. It is a place of such unfathomable scale that it simultaneously dwarfs human life and in its savage beauty promises transcendence. For the Caldwells, it would deliver only a terrifying silence. 10 years later, the raw facts of their last movements would be a hauntingly small knot of data, a final credit card swipe at a Tusayan gas station, a cell tower ping near the South Rim, and then the void. But in the blistering heat of that July morning, there was only the sun-drenched, youthful hope of a family on vacation. The official missing persons report was not filed until 3 days after they were scheduled to arrive in Los Angeles for their flight home. This delay, this small, innocent miscalculation of time by a distant relative, would later become a source of profound, collective regret for the investigators. The world had swallowed them whole on a Tuesday afternoon, but the official search did not begin until Friday, a lifetime in a wilderness as vast and unforgiving as the Kaibab National Forest, the great green ocean that surrounds the canyon's precipice. Chief Investigator David Roth remembered the initial request arriving with an almost routine simplicity: a delayed rental car return, a concerned neighbor, nothing that immediately screamed tragedy. That calmness would not last. The initial assumption, the easy answer preferred by the weary officers of the Coconino County Sheriff's Office, was that the Caldwells had simply gone off-grid, perhaps enjoying a few extra days of rustic camping before emerging sheepishly to face the fines. But this assumption crumbled when the investigators spoke to the family's neighbor, a woman who had seen them off. She described Eleanor's meticulous planning, the laminated checklist she carried, the color-coded itineraries. The Caldwells were not the spontaneous type. They were precise, punctual, and predictable. They would not miss their flight. They would not cause alarm. No, something fundamental had gone wrong. The focus of the investigation quickly turned to the last confirmed sighting: a CCTV image from a small general store just outside the park's main gate. There was Mark, laughing at something Eleanor had said, Chloe standing nearby, already wearing a new, brightly colored Grand Canyon souvenir t-shirt. The image was a portrait of blissful normality, a cruel, frozen moment of their last known peace. Their vehicle, a white 2012 Ford Explorer rental, stood clearly visible in the foreground, unremarkable in every way. The initial search was a sprawling, chaotic affair. Search and rescue teams scoured the trails inside the park, calling their names into the echoing vastness of the gorge. Helicopters, little more than noisy insects against the sheer scale of the landscape, flew grid patterns over the rim. The Grand Canyon is not a single place, but a labyrinth of side canyons, plateaus, and hidden ravines. And the search area was soon expanded to the sprawling, impenetrable wilderness of the Kaibab, where millions of acres of pine forest and scrubland swallowed the search efforts whole. Weeks turned into a month, and the search effort, once a massive, desperate wave of energy, began to recede, leaving behind only the cold, dry sand of unanswered questions. How could a family in an easily identifiable vehicle vanish from a paved road in the middle of a national park? Did they hike a deadly, unmarked trail? Or did they simply take a wrong turn down one of the countless unmarked logging roads that spiderwebbed the forest outside the park boundary? The case, like so many others swallowed by the West's unforgiving geography, settled into the grim status of a cold file. The rental car company filed an insurance claim. The missing persons posters faded under the Arizona sun. Detective Roth, however, couldn't shake the image of 12-year-old Chloe. He imagined her in that silent, darkening wilderness, and the emotional weight of that simple picture became his personal anchor to the case, preventing him from fully letting go. For 10 years, the case file sat in the archives, occasionally reviewed by a rotating cast of cold case detectives, each concluding the same thing. They were either the victims of an unimaginable fall into the canyon, a fate that offered no closure, or they were lost to the elements in the vast surrounding forest, a fate equally unsatisfying. The prevailing theory, the one that offered the most simple though horrifying explanation, was a wrong turn, a desperate attempt to find a shortcut or a scenic overlook on a little-used fire road, a drive that ended with a flat tire and a collective, tragic decision to walk for help under the brutal midday sun. But the car, the final crucial piece of evidence, remained a phantom. Its absence was a scream in the quiet data of the investigation. It was the only tangible object that had vanished with the family, and without it, the narrative remained incomplete, a story without its final horrifying chapter. The 10-year anniversary of the Caldwells' disappearance arrived not with a flurry of new leads, but with a somber, understated press release from the sheriff's office, a bureaucratic acknowledgement of enduring failure. The family's tragedy had become a cautionary tale whispered in the park's campgrounds. The quiet passage of a decade, however, had also brought about profound technological change. The digital ghost of the white Ford Explorer, which had been so elusive in 2012, was now being hunted by new digital trackers. An ambitious young analyst in the Coconino County office, assigned the cold case of the week, began to cross-reference the Explorer's vehicle identification number, VIN, with every conceivable database. Insurance write-offs, junkyard manifests, and, crucially, a new, federally maintained database of all vehicles towed from state and federal roadways. For years, the original investigators had focused their search too narrowly, where the car had gone missing, instead of where it might have been pulled from a deep, unseen ditch. This minor administrative reclassification of the search parameters was the pivot point, the subtle turn of the lens that finally brought the impossible into horrific focus. The analyst, a 25-year-old former computer science student named Lena Vargas, ran the VIN one late Friday afternoon, more out of procedural thoroughness than genuine expectation. The result that flashed on her screen was not a new lead, but a terrifying piece of historical data, a record that had been sitting in plain sight, misfiled for almost 10 years. The Ford Explorer, the Caldwell family's temporary vessel of summer joy, had not vanished. It had been officially towed by the Arizona Department of Transportation in the early hours of June 24, 2013, barely a year after they were last seen alive. The record was sparse, almost clinically dry. Vehicle, white Ford Explorer, CA plate. Location, mile marker 132, U.S. Route 89. Condition, wrecked, major body damage, apparently struck by a deer or a large object. Towing company, Winslow Holbrook Recovery. Disposition, impound lot, Winslow, Arizona. Lena Vargas stared at the screen, her heart hammering a rhythm of pure dread. The location, mile marker 132, was on the complete opposite side of the Navajo Nation from the Grand Canyon's south rim, a distance of nearly 150 miles as the crow flies, or a harrowing hours-long drive. This shattered the simple, tragic narrative of a wrong turn into the Kaibab National Forest. If the vehicle had been in Winslow, it meant the Caldwells had completed their journey out of the canyon area. They had successfully driven across the vast, lonely expanse of the Navajo Reservation, only to meet their fate an hour and a half after they had effectively escaped the wilderness. The implication was immediate, chilling, and inescapable. The official story of the family lost inside the Grand Canyon had been a complete fabrication, built on an erroneous premise. The true mystery was not how they vanished, but what happened to them after they were safe. Lena immediately printed the tow slip, the paper feeling heavy and ominous in her hand, and walked it straight to Detective Roth's desk. The detective, now an older man with the permanent shadow of lost cases in his eyes, read the information once, then a second time, a wave of profound, sickening realization washing over him. The car, that missing piece, had not been a ghost. It had been misfiled, the victim of a simple administrative error between multiple jurisdictions. The Caldwells' tragedy had been hidden in a bureaucratic oversight. Winslow, Arizona was a town of deep, dusty history and a surprising volume of vehicle traffic, trucking routes, cross-country vacationers, and the countless daily movements of local residents. The tow lot, a sprawling acreage of rusted metal and broken glass, was a graveyard of untold, sudden narratives. When Roth and Vargas arrived, the Explorer had long been stripped of its rental company's property and moved to a deep, rarely accessed corner of the lot, a place where wrecked vehicles went to be forgotten before the inevitable crushing and recycling. The lot manager, a laconic man named George, located the Explorer's coordinates on his old grease-stained logbook, and within minutes, the white Ford stood before them, a monument to a 10-year-old disaster. Its front end was an unholy mess of twisted metal, but the rest of the car, protected by the dry desert air, was remarkably intact. The windows were up, and a thick layer of fine red dust lay over every surface, insulating the interior from the elements and perhaps preserving its secrets. The moment Detective Roth laid his hand on the door handle, he felt the chill of profound discovery. This was no longer a cold file, it was a sealed tomb waiting to be opened. George produced a key from a forgotten bag. The tow company had kept the original set, a small mercy of procedure, and with a dry metallic click, the driver's door swung open on the 10th anniversary of their disappearance. The interior of the Ford Explorer was immediately and overwhelmingly recognizable as the final repository of a family vacation. The aroma was a dry, stale miasma of old air, faded pine scent, and something vaguely organic. But visually, it was a time capsule. Eleanor Caldwell's purse lay on the passenger seat, an old-fashioned leather bag, the contents untouched. Her driver's license, credit cards, a small, worn family photo, and $67 in cash. This simple fact, the presence of the cash and the cards, immediately struck the first, fatal blow against any theory of robbery or simple abduction. If their disappearance had been financially motivated, the evidence would have been absent. The back seat was a chaotic collage of a child's last hours. A well-loved copy of Harry Potter, a crumpled empty bag of chips, and Chloe's small plush alpaca toy, its synthetic fur now matted and gray with dust. The details were overwhelming, intimate, and profoundly sad, forcing Roth to step back, taking a moment to regain the professional distance the scene demanded. This was not just a missing persons case, it was a crime scene, a decade in the making. The scene demanded forensic precision, not sentimentality. The forensic team, flown in urgently from Flagstaff, began the methodical, agonizing process of processing the vehicle. Every speck of dust, every strand of fiber was documented and collected. The first significant discovery came from the trunk. Tucked beneath the spare tire cover, wrapped in a faded red and white checkered picnic blanket, was a fully packed high-end Nikon camera case. Inside, the camera's battery was dead, but the memory card was still securely in place. The photographs, once recovered, would rewrite the narrative of the Caldwells' last day. They showed the family at the South Rim, Chloe beaming, Mark and Eleanor holding hands against the backdrop of the massive, rust-colored chasm. The last 20 images, however, were taken in rapid succession from inside the car, all blurry, all capturing the sun setting behind a line of black cedar trees, the light fading rapidly. The very last photograph, time-stamped 8:47 p.m. on that Tuesday evening, was almost completely black, save for a small distorted streak of light from the interior dashboard, suggesting a frantic, unplanned stop. The car was not wrecked at the canyon. It was wrecked at night, 150 miles away. The chronological flow of the photographs was a narrative killer, proving that whatever happened did not happen inside the national park. The family had made it out, and they were, at that last recorded moment, driving into the darkness. But the most chilling discovery, the one that truly changed the trajectory of the investigation from accident to potential homicide, was found beneath the driver's seat. It was not a piece of personal property, but a small, unassuming length of nylon rope, knotted tightly at one end. This was the discovery that the video's title had hinted at, the tie-down that suggested force, not fate. This was not a rope one typically finds in a family rental car. It was a rough, industrial-grade material, frayed and stained with a dark, reddish-brown substance that the initial field test immediately flagged as presumptive blood. The rope was carefully collected and sent to the state lab, where its analysis would prove to be the most devastating piece of evidence. The DNA testing was slow, but the result, when it finally arrived, was a blow that shook the foundation of the sheriff's office. The blood on the rope belonged to Mark Caldwell, the father. And the knot, painstakingly analyzed by a master knot expert, was not a simple camping knot. It was a hitch knot used to secure or bind a person or object with an extremely tight, non-slip grip. The image of the laughing family at the canyon now felt like a shroud. The wreckage of the car, the missing credit card, the rope, and the blood. These fragments coalesced into a single terrifying hypothesis. The collision that wrecked the front end of the car was not the cause of their disappearance. It was a secondary event, perhaps a desperate attempt to escape or a fatal violent act meant to cover a more sinister crime. The discovery of Mark Caldwell's blood on the rope, the evidence that they had been bound or struggling, forced the investigation into a new, darker line of inquiry. Abduction gone wrong. Detective Roth and Vargas now focused on the area around mile marker 1-32 on U.S. Route 89, a lonely stretch of highway that runs through the eastern part of the Navajo Nation. This was a sparsely populated, almost desolate region, a place where a desperate act could be executed with little fear of witnesses. They knew the timeline. The last known photograph was taken at 8:47 p.m., a moment of frantic blurriness. The car was towed at 2:15 a.m. the following morning. This 6-hour window was the new frontier of the mystery, a dark slice of time where a family had met an unknown fate. Roth flew over the area in a borrowed helicopter, the same machine that had once searched the vastness of the canyon, now focusing on the immediate perimeter of the crash site. The aerial perspective revealed the chilling truth of the area's isolation. The highway ran parallel to a deep, brush-choked ravine, with no homes or businesses visible for miles in either direction. The land itself seemed to conspire to hide secrets. Local police and tribal authorities were now fully engaged, alerted to the terrifying possibility that a predator had been operating on their highway. The tow truck driver, a man named Jesse who had since retired, was located in a small town 50 miles away. His testimony, a fragmented recollection of a single night 10 years ago, was crucial. He remembered the call from the Department of Transportation, a white SUV that had struck a large animal, maybe a cow or a deer, and was left abandoned on the shoulder. When he arrived, the car was empty. Jesse recalled seeing the major front-end damage, but more importantly, a subtle detail that the original tow report had missed. The driver's side door, the one Roth had opened with such dread, was ajar, not closed, as if the driver had left in a hurry or had been pulled from the vehicle. Crucially, Jesse did not remember the car being locked. He had simply tagged it, photographed the damage, and pulled it onto his flatbed, utterly unaware that he was removing a 10-year mystery from the roadside. He confirmed that the keys were left on the ground near the rear tire, which was why he had them in the first place. A strange detail, as a family of 4 would never willingly abandon their keys in a fully packed car with a purse and cash still inside unless they were forced to. The new focus of the investigation turned to the internal evidence of the car itself. Forensics had noted tiny, almost invisible metal filings embedded in the carpet of the passenger side footwell. Microscopic analysis revealed they were a unique alloy used in welding repairs, a distinct signature pointing to a specific type of industrial work. Furthermore, the exterior of the car yielded an equally significant clue. The rear bumper was marred by a series of shallow, linear scratches, as if a heavy, long object had been dragged against it. The shape and width of the scratches were meticulously measured and photographed. The detectives developed a new, chilling theory, one built on the fragments of physical evidence. The Caldwells had driven out of the canyon, were forced to stop on the lonely highway, perhaps pulled over by a fraudulent official or ambushed at a makeshift roadblock, and were then violently removed from their vehicle. The damage to the front end, the massive collision that had stopped their journey, might have been a deliberate act of sabotage, a way to render the car immobile. But what was the motive? The untouched cash and credit cards argued against simple robbery. Was this a personal vendetta against Mark Caldwell? Or had they stumbled upon a darker, hidden operation in the desolate stretches of the Navajo Nation? The tie-down rope, the driver's blood, the strange metal filings, and the deep, silent scratches on the bumper. They were all threads leading into a terrifying unknown, hinting at a final desperate struggle and a systematic attempt to cover a crime that had been hiding in plain sight for a decade. The truth, Roth realized, was far more complex and far darker than a simple tragedy of the wild. The final terrifying discovery lay waiting, not in the car, but in the meticulous reconstruction of the crime scene. Mile marker 132. The small metal filings found in the car's carpet were the key. After a week of painstaking research and cross-referencing with regional industrial permits, Lena Vargas was able to trace the unique alloy to a series of unlicensed, temporary welding shops that specialized in agricultural equipment repairs, often set up opportunistically along the major trucking routes near Native American reservations. Specifically, the closest match came from a small, dilapidated repair shed located just 7 miles north of the crash site, an isolated structure used by a nomadic repairman known only by his first name, Silas. The property was technically on private tribal land, complicating the process, but Detective Roth secured the necessary warrants and assembled a team. The old shed, barely more than a corrugated iron shack, was an immediate study in decay and neglect. But the forensic sweep was thorough. It was here, in the dust of the shed's dirt floor, that the investigation was granted its final, definitive, and profoundly sorrowful answer. Buried shallowly beneath a pile of rusted sheet metal and discarded welding equipment, the forensic team discovered a small, unassuming silver pendant on a brittle chain. It was an item no larger than a coin, engraved with the initials CEC. The analysis of the pendant was heartbreakingly brief. It was Chloe Caldwell's favorite necklace, a 12th birthday gift from her mother. The proximity of the discovery to the crash site, the tie-down rope in the car, and the blood on the father's clothing fragments found at the impound lot now formed a clear, unspeakable picture. The family had not been abducted for a long, drawn-out ransom. They had been intercepted, incapacitated, likely at the welding shed or shortly after, and their ordeal had ended violently in the short, dark hours between the last known photograph and the tow truck's arrival. The narrative was no longer one of a grand, sinister plot, but one of opportunistic, fatal encounter. The Caldwells, after surviving the vastness of the Grand Canyon, had been rendered vulnerable on a lonely stretch of highway, only to cross paths with a singular, unknown figure who saw an opportunity in their vacation vehicle and their isolated presence. The true, final horror was revealed when the tribal police, acting on a desperate search of the immediate area around the shed, located a disturbed patch of ground near the ravine, a location precisely measured to align with the scratches on the Explorer's rear bumper. The earth had settled over the years, but the disturbance was undeniable. With a slow, solemn reverence, the excavation began. What they found, carefully interred and now finally brought back into the light after a decade of silent vigil, were the remains of all 3 Caldwells. The discovery was not the dramatic, immediate closure the media craved, but a quiet, profound moment of horrific certainty. The bodies told the final tragic story in a language of forensic pathology, a fierce, final struggle, and the clear, undeniable evidence of blunt force trauma. The car had not been wrecked by a deer. The impact was likely a final desperate lurch by one of the victims, perhaps Mark or Eleanor, to get the immobile vehicle onto the highway's shoulder before they were overwhelmed and forcibly removed. The deep scratches on the bumper, the small silver pendant, the blood-stained rope, all were elements of a singular, horrifying narrative that began with the simple ambition of a summer vacation and ended in the silence of an unmarked, desolate ravine. Justice for the Caldwells would not be swift, but it would now be informed by the cold, irrefutable evidence that had been silently waiting for 10 long years inside that white Ford Explorer. Their bodies had vanished, but their car and the small, desperate signs of their final struggle had remained behind, holding the keys to the truth until the world was finally ready to look